Okay, what's up, first ministers? This is Phantology, Stephen and Josh here with the final entry in the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan. We're talking Autumn Republic, the Autumn Republic, that is. So, Josh, we had a rough start to getting set up. You had a bit of a home accident. I have a fly buzzing around my head. That's driving me crazy. So it can only go up from here, right?
You'd like to think so, Stephen. I really hope so.
Yeah, I really hope the buzzing doesn't get picked up on the audio, but you can only do so much when you're in a home studio. But let's maybe move past that into the book. So, Flintlock Fantasy. This is the third entry. Obviously, we're wrapping up the first trilogy. Brian McClellan has since gone on to write 3 more books in the same universe. The Gods and Blood and Powder trilogy. And I think the second trilogy is better than the first trilogy. I think that this trilogy was really strong for a new author coming in, taking a stab at the genre, doing really well, obviously getting published, having a really unique take on the genre. And then I think the second trilogy is like where he really kind of finds his voice and locks in a bit more to storytelling. That, I mean, I'm not trying to diss on the first trilogy. I just think that I like the second better, and I thought that this was a really strong start to Brian's career. But that's my take, and I think there's a lot to like, and we'll get more into that.
Yeah, I can't comment on the second trilogy because I haven't started it and probably won't start it until after the craziness that is the ending of the year. I had to.
You mean like all the new releases that are coming out?
Yeah. After Rhythm of War, and we get a new Dresden like next week, and we get sequel to Rage of Dragons and
the third Poppy War, and you're not even current on Joe Abercrombie, so you're not reading the Trouble with Peace, which came out earlier this week that I'm well into and loving. So look for that review coming out soon. But yeah, there's a lot to be excited about at the end of 2020. Maybe, we had to go through all of the rough times that were the beginning of 2020 to be rewarded with the fantasy book payoff at the end of the year. That's probably a terrible take. Yeah, I'm gonna scratch that from a. I was just searching. I was searching for something. I don't know what that was.
Yeah, 2020 does not look like it's getting better anytime soon.
But at least we have books to read in our, to distract us from our misery, maybe.
Yeah. But I had to constantly go back and remind myself that this is a first-time author, that this is his first published series, and it does not feel like that when you're reading it. There are some rough edges, yes. It's not my top favorite all-time series. It's probably not even my top 10, to be honest. But it, for a first-time author, was exceptionally done, I think.
So that's a really good review. How many times do we look at the first thing that an author has put out and say, this is amazing, we love it, it's the greatest? Like, we're saying Stormlight Archive is so great for Brandon Sanderson right now. Well, he's published like 10 to 15 books prior to getting into this one. Prior to, right? So this is like nowhere near his first entry. If you look at Joe Abercrombie right now, is coming out with this new fantastic trilogy. Well, he's written 8 books prior, right? So Dresden is awesome right now. Well, it didn't really start all that awesome, right? It took a while to really get into it. I mean, fight me, Dresden fans. But the point I'm trying to make is it takes a while to get there when you are a first-time author. So you having that opinion is a really strong review, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I went in my initial reaction video. I kept I would criticize some things, and then I would always come back and say, but for a first-time author, what do you expect? Are they going to have pacing perfectly mastered for their first book? Of course not. Are they going to be able to handle every side character exceptionally well? Of course not. Like, this is, these are nitpicks for a first-time author, which I think lends itself to a really promising career. So I'm excited to keep following him.
And he's writing a new trilogy. I believe it's in a different world. I think he said he's done with Powder Mage after these 6. He's also written several short stories. which I haven't read, but I heard are pretty good. But he's writing this new series called The Glass Immortals, I think. I want to say I pulled that out, but that's supposed to come out like 2021, a book there. So I'm definitely looking forward to following Brian's career. I think he's a very promising author. If you haven't listened to our other videos, we talked about how he was actually a student of Sanderson's, and you kind of see that in the way that he constructs his magic systems, especially. There's a lot of similarities between this book and Mistborn, I would say, or this trilogy and Mistborn, in terms of like setting up the government, kind of the general feel of the setting is similar. So you can see a lot of Sanderson influences, but he's also got a lot of really unique things that are his.
Yeah. It's a harder magic system. Most of it is a harder magic system, I should say. There are some softer magic systems in there. So in that way, he's kind of a student of Sanderson as well as a literal student of Sanderson, right?
Yeah.
And he, his prose, again, isn't amazing, but it is kind of like Sanderson, how Sanderson talks about being a glass window that you look through and you see what's going on. That's the way he likes to construct his writing, as opposed to a stained glass window, which is like an author like maybe Patrick Rothfuss would do, where you look through and see the story through a really pretty stained glass window.
Yeah. So I think what you're trying to say is like Rothfuss will have a very beautiful window that you're looking through and everything comes through perfectly. Whereas Sanderson is really just trying to like put you right into it and say like, here's what's happening. And we're not going to distract with the prose. We're just going to tell you what's happening in a very accessible way. And that's, I agree. That's more of what McClellan does as well. Yeah. The stained glass window thing is nice. If you can do that, I think few can. Honestly, it's very difficult to write prose. It's very difficult to write a book to the point where the prose is actively contributing. I think what I look for in a book is just making sure that the quality of the prose doesn't detract. Like, I'm totally fine reading a book if the prose is just there enough to get me into the action and say, here's what's happening. And you're like, okay, great. Like, the book's written in a real easy way to read, and I don't have to worry about like weird constructions of sentences and like awkward vocabulary. Like, that's annoying and distracting, and I don't like that. If authors are able to take the prose to the next level and write it in such a beautiful way or a witty, funny way where the language itself lends to the story, that's really cool. That's something that Rothfuss does amazingly. And I'm going to throw Abercrombie in there as well. Yeah. I think he's a total master of this like dark wit and humor that I mean, I guess I've plugged Abercrombie quite a bit, but I'm reading his book right now. So that's probably why. But yeah, McClellan, fantastic at just like putting you right into the action.
Exactly. And there isn't anything majorly wrong with the books, I would say. And we're going to get in. I do have some criticisms that I want to talk about when we talk about spoilers. But for anybody that wants to read this book, I would say go for it. Another member of Fantology, Ben, just finished the first book and he enjoyed it. And it took a while for him to get into it. And he was wondering, he texted me and he said he was at 30% and he wondered if he should keep reading it. And I advised him that he should. I think that if you get through the first book, if you like don't enjoy the first book at all, then I don't think it gets markedly better throughout this first series. But I'd say at least finish the first book because it's quick and exciting and fun, if nothing else.
And while there's a lot going on with the plot, there's always something exciting driving things along. I think you would agree with this because we talked about this in our review of Crimson Campaign, but it's really a character book. We care about who these guys are. We feel like we understand them enough and we're in their heads, and they seem like very realized characters. And this is a huge pro in McClellan's favor because this is not something that just any author can do. He does it awesome, and that's what drives the story along. So the characters are what you're going to love, hopefully.
And when Ben finished the first book, he said, I didn't love it, but I did like the characters. And so I said, well, if you like the characters, then you should keep reading because the characters stay really, really well done.
And you get more pieces on them as well. So
Hey.
it's not like after the first book you understand exactly everything. You don't understand everything on them after one book. You get more backstory. Obviously, they grow and they're very dynamic. So yeah, the characters are fantastic. So before we get into the spoiler section of our podcast, if you like what we're doing here at Phantology, if you like our book reviews, if you're a fan of the genre, then check out more episodes. We've covered quite a few series at this point. We have a few, we're kind of like mid-series, and we're going to continue to plug away on those. But if you like anything that we're doing, check us out at on the internet at www.phantologybooks.com. All of our episodes are up there, and you can, I guess, just click into whatever series you're interested in. And we have most things covered by this point. If you'd like to chat with us, please do join our Discord, and we're all on there. We're fairly active. There is a growing community, and we have like different options if you'd like to read along on a book with us and get our comments. That's something that you can do. That's actually a Patreon benefit. And so if you want to support the podcast and you feel like we are even worth your money, which, I mean, debatable, but if you think that we are
debatable, Stephen, we put out good, solid content.
Not debatable, says Josh. So yeah, if you'd like to support the podcast, every dollar goes directly back into what we're doing to produce quality content and get this out to our listeners as quickly as possible. So that would be something that we'd very much appreciate. If you are considering a audiobook membership, if you'd like to try out Audible, we have a partnership with them where you can just click the link in the episode description, and it will take you to a page that you can sign up for a Audible trial membership. You get a free book, and then we get a little bit of benefit as well, and that will also help the podcast. There's lots of ways that you can help out the podcast, and just listening, honestly, is like we're flattered. So we appreciate all the support
and sharing. If you like it, share it and tell your friends about it. Tell your fellow nerd friends about it. And we're all here for the community. We love talking, and we love hearing other people's opinions about these books that we like to come on and talk about. That's why we started this whole thing, was to give us an excuse to get together every week and talk about nerdy fantasy things.
Because what's better than that, right?
Exactly.
So, and Phantology is also supporting a charity. We're supporting Books for Prisoners. You can find that at booksforprisoners.net. This is a group that's been around since the 70s, and they are dedicated to providing books to incarcerated individuals to try to, reduce rates of recidivism. What is the word?
Yeah. Recidivism.
Yeah, that's the word. Anyway, we're trying to reduce that, educate folks while they are behind bars, and this is a fantastic group that, with the donation, will send books to these guys who really need it. So that said, let's talk some Autumn Republic. So after the events of the second book ended, Crimson Campaign ended on like somewhat of a cliffhanger, where we had Taniel running off after being captured by Kresimir, and then you had Tamus being successful, and then he had got an alliance with the Deliv guys who are going to come in and hopefully turn the tides of the war against the Kez, who seem to have an overwhelming advantage. And then off in Adapest, we actually had a little bit of an uprising internally, and there was a bunch of buildings were destroyed, and there's kind of like a question mark as to what is going on here, because there's like some mystical forces being involved, and some bigger players are coming to the field. So going into book 3, like maybe what were you expecting, Josh, after book 2? Like, did you have any theories, inclinations of where this one might be going?
Well, I had hopes, and this is where I was a little bit let down, because where I hoped the series was going wasn't really where it went. I hoped that we would be dealing with a grander scale. I hope that the gods would get a little bit more involved, which they do, but
Yep.
It's not at a very grand scale, right? It's more the gods, and we'll get to this at the very end when we talk about kind
Uh-huh.
of the twists and turns. But I was hoping that with Adam dying at the ending of the last book, that we were going to get more of like an epic, grand, godlike scale of how can we bring back our patron god that's kind of become our patron god, I guess, and
Right.
kind of start dealing with forces of the universe. And we didn't really get that, which is fine. But I was hoping that because of the ending of the last book with Adam dying and that seeming like it was going to be a big deal, that we would get more of that. And we didn't really. And for the first 80% of the book, Adam wasn't really even mentioned, right? I mean, maybe in passingly mentioned.
Yeah, and this is something that I kind of struggled with as well. Maybe we shouldn't go there quite yet because, like you said, it is the end, and we will talk about it. But the God thing was a little unsatisfying to me. I thought the thing that I struggled with the most in the series was like, what is the conflict? Is the conflict versus the Kez? Because that seemed like that was always kind of the thing. But then they were just kind of like swept aside, like, oh, the Kez had an internal revolution, and so they're actually like no longer a problem. And we're like, well, the Kez were the problem for the first two books, and that was always like they were the big bad. They were winning everything, and you know, and Tamas, the entire second book was running from them, and now they're just gone. And this new thing is, you know, the problems with the god and Charlemagne and this internal stuff. And so it's like that was jarring to me, that this change towards the end.
I totally agree with you. And that was my other criticism of going into this book, was it didn't really feel like there were villains. It felt like there were things that the heroes had to do to like be successful. You know, they had to win this battle or that battle. And the Kez were the villains, but how villainous were they? You didn't really know their motivations.
Yeah.
You got that they were maybe religious zealots a little bit because of how much they hated the gunpowder, burning the gunpowder and stuff.
Right.
And
they were led by this crazy god, and they were trying, you know, the first book they were trying to bring him back. And I should correct myself. I said Charlemagne, but he was more of the villain in the second book. The god here is Claremont, right? Two long C names, confusing. So I apologize there. But yeah, the Kez are basically like, they have unlimited cannon fodder, and they are going to win because they've got so many guys, and they've got the wardens, and they're bad. But like, who are they really? What's their motivation? It's hard to say exactly. And so maybe we were thinking, like, going to book 3, it's like, okay, we're going to find out what's going on with the Kez. Like, there's some reason maybe, and we're going to get some big epic showdown battle here. But honestly, like, the whole war thing was just swept aside a little bit. And then the final confrontation was this thing that had kind of been lurking the whole time. And if you think about it, like, there were hints and there were reasons why this whole political intrigue, God thing reveal made sense. But at the same time, it was strange to me that we would have this large scale change in the basic conflict of the series so late on in the plot.
A way that this was done really well, and I don't want to give spoilers for the series, was the original First Law trilogy, right? You have a larger conflict in that, and then the last 10 to 20% of the last book, it kind of changed your perception of what the conflict was really all about, right?
Yeah,
that was done exceptionally well, like amazingly well, right?
Yep.
This series,
I see a lot of similarities there now that you bring that up. I mean, let's not say spoilers, but there was like this large scale war conflict throughout most of it. And then we got to some kind of resolution there. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, it's over, but actually, no, it's not over, because we realized that there's actually been something else going on the whole time that's even worse than, you know, than the bads, quote unquote, that we were fighting previously.
So this felt a lot like that, only a few tiers down, right? Where it was like, okay, cool, this happened. Like, okay, the Kez finished up. Okay, we got a new god that we're going to have to deal with that we haven't really dealt with yet.
But then they are dealt with and it's over.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's back up and let's talk about some plot points before all this.
Yeah.
But this all happened because I thought that when Adam died, that was going to be the driving force behind this book, and it wasn't, like, at all, right? And so that was my main problem with jumping into this book, was I felt like a little bit of whiplash, I guess, which is, I think, common, right, for books that have a big epic ending to the preceding book, and then you slow down a bit, right, and have to get back into the world a little bit, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to always it's tough to continue the tide of the climax of your previous book. Like, you've kind of got to start off a book with a exposition, right?
Yeah.
Typically, I mean, see beginning of Rhythm of War. No spoilers there. Intro chapters are out, so read those if you're interested. Primer, I guess, from me. So one thing I did like from this book was, I felt like in the previous books, the characters, which are fantastic and my favorite part of the series, were very separated out to the point where they weren't, like, some were interacting, but there wasn't a whole lot of crossover. And I really like it when we have these multiple point of view type of books, when you have the same character, like two POV characters or more, that are in the same scene. And so you're seeing a character that you see a lot of things through their eyes. If you see that person then through the eyes of another POV character, I think that's fun. I think that leads to a lot of interesting developments. And I think in this book, we had the characters just together on screen, on camera more. And I thought that was a big improvement in this book over the previous.
I think that the two characters that did that the best for me was Flora and Taniel, right?
Okay.
Where you always wanted them to sit down and talk, right, throughout the whole whole first two books, and even half of the third, or whenever they finally had their conversation, because there's so much left unresolved, and they had seen each other for like one scene, and then after that, Taniel was just avoiding her.
Yeah,
and so that was a really interesting dynamic when they finally met up and talked.
Yeah. Their relationship is frustrating because, like you say, like, there was this huge thing in their previously great relationship with this infidelity that was never addressed. And it made sense why it wasn't, like, it was general poor communication, but obviously emotions were high over this. And there was a lot of other things going on at the same time. And Taniel, had Ka-Poel, and he also was addicted to drugs for the majority of the series. So there were, like, some solid reasons why the conversations never happened, but you're always hoping that they would kind of hash things out. And so that was good that happened to some degree.
Yeah. And at first I started not liking Flora, right? I started out the series of being like, oh, this girl, who does she think she is?
Yeah, she's messing with our guy Taniel. She's broken his heart. What's up with this?
Yeah. But by the third book, you start to really like her, and you start to really understand why she did what she did. And, she says, look, I'm hearing stories of you over there being, quite the ladies' man. She probably doesn't think that he's being faithful. And, and so she's she has her wants and needs, and I'm not trying to justify infidelity, obviously, but you can understand what happened and why, and that's something that if they wanted to work through, they probably could, but they never even address it.
Yeah, Phantology does not recommend or accept infidelity, obviously, but yeah, I think what you're trying to say is that, like, these actions are understandable. And it's not just some weird square character doing something that doesn't make sense. Like, as a human, you understand how these events could happen.
Yeah. And so I really liked how they finally got down and had that talk, and they didn't resolve everything, right? And nor did I really want them to be together, because I was a big fan of Paul and Taniel, so I'm happy with how that all went down. But it was just, like you were saying, there is finally some resolutions of characters that you wanted to meet more, and share scenes together that finally did get to.
Yeah, yeah. This is not a spoiler, but in the next series, Vlora is a main point of view character. Like right away, you're going to know that from page 1. And it's a series that's at about 10 years in the future on a different part of the world. So Vlora is someone who grows a lot in that series. And so having read those, it's hard for me to separate those events out and think back to only having read the third, because she's pretty good in that trilogy, I'll say.
Okay. She started being a really compelling character, especially with how she started standing up to Tamus and was kind of one of the only people that would stand up to Tamus and call out on his nonsense. Two other characters that I'm really glad that they got to develop their relationship was Bo and Nyla.
Yeah, Bo and Nyla are for sure fan favorites. Definitely. So let's hear your take on these.
Okay. Negative thing right out the bat was Nyla was another one where I kept expecting her to have a reason why she was gifted the way she was gifted.
Yeah, like she's the special and she doesn't have to use gloves and what's going on here. But yeah, still not sure, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe there are super fans. So if you are a super fan of the series and can explain why Nyla was this gifted that didn't need to use gloves and was able to, stay hidden, and that was the other thing was it seemed like there were so many times in this book where she couldn't really control her powers. I remember once she was like ticked because there was a lady that was like flirting with Bo and was treating Nyla like garbage.
Yeah,
when I was trying to see Bo, and then she like burnt the back of her dress because she was so angry and she couldn't keep her powers under control. Right.
Yeah, she's got like a winter mantle thing going on here a little bit.
Yeah. Well, which makes sense because it's told that the more you interact with the else, the stronger your passions become. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But why was she able to keep that in check like the rest of her life? And through all these much more traumatic experiences that she went through in the first book, especially, through the abuse that she...
Well, wouldn't you just say she hasn't used her powers to the extent that she is now?
Yeah.
There's obviously that large scale battle where she went through like several thousand people and turned the tide of the war.
Yeah. I get that. It seemed like there was a lot more of her not being able to control her powers, but why was she able to control her powers for the first, 20 years of her life? Yeah. Going through much more traumatic experiences. And there might be in-world reasons for this, but to me, it just felt kind of weird, I guess.
Yeah, she was like drawn out somehow. I don't know. I mean, anytime you have magic in a book, like, look, we review books where there is magic, right? Yeah. Any book that Photology is going to review, there's pretty much going to be magic. And magic is literally always a plot device. It's something the author puts in the story in order to drive the story along. And so therefore, they can use it however they would like. And sometimes it's in a way where like, oh, they've ran out of magic at this crucial time, or, oh, they can't control their magic. And sometimes it's like, well, why can't they control it? But at the same time, it's like, well, it's magic. There's no rules around magic, like it's that's the point. So yeah. It's tough, right?
And I guess I was hoping that she would have a chosen one arc a little bit. And I was hoping that would be done really uniquely where you found out she was the chosen one, and then you have book 2, and then she has a 1-book arc where she suddenly is maybe even one of the gods reincarnated or something interesting like that. But she just is a Mary Sue a little bit.
A little bit. I can see that. I think a lot of people really like Nyla because they like the idea of, she's just like, a laundress washer woman, and then she gets the powers and she's cool. But at the same time, you're like, well, the arc isn't finished. Like she needs more. And so
in my headcanon, I was trying to come up with reasons why she would have been placed in the palace. Like in my head, I was like, maybe the king or the cabal was like, knew that she was gifted and wanted to keep an eye on her. So they put her at some lowly level position in the palace so that they could keep track of her and like kind of watch her and make sure that she didn't go crazy. I don't know. Like in my after I finished book 2 and we found all this out about her, I started crafting all these theories as to why her character had the backstory that she had. And then we just didn't really get anything with it. But
yeah, so two good. I mean, their relationship is good, right? And they're always kind of exciting, but at the same time, it's like it's almost like there's too many characters on screen, and we weren't quite able to wrap up because some characters had really nice arcs. Like Tamus's arc is really good, and by the end, like his death was really well earned, and it was emotional but satisfying. I mean, I just finished my rewatch of the Marvel movies for the second time, and might have cried a little bit when Iron Man died in Endgame. And so, I mean, I think you have like something similar. Yeah, okay. Maybe, come on, people have seen Endgame by now, right? Like, does that Thanos doesn't demand our silence on that one anymore. But I think Tamus has a similar thing here where it's the perfect time for him to die, and it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, you don't want him to die because you really like him by this point.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about a super big positive, and that was Tamus, right? One of the best arc in the series for sure, right? Where you see him at the beginning of the series almost as a butcher, right? You see him taking out all of the nobility and killing a lot of people, starting what could be a civil war.
And you really disliked him in the first book, right?
Yeah. Well, for half of the first book, he was somebody that started out as, I thought he was going to be the villain, but he ended up being one of my favorites throughout the first book, and by the ending of the series, by far my favorite character. And he was willing to sacrifice. He was willing to not just sacrifice his life, but sacrifice, what he had worked for, right? For the good of the people, and not just sacrifice his life in dying, but sacrifice his life in working for the better of Adra, right?
Yeah, talk about a patriot.
Yeah,
I mean, he's perfect for the covers with this very French Revolution-esque type feel of this, grizzled guy who's willing to do anything for his country. And the ultimate Adrian.
I would love a prequel series if McClellan ever wants to write more of this. I would love to see some early campaigns that Tamus went on.
Might exist in short stories.
Oh, do they?
I'm not certain, but I know there's a ton of short stories, so it's very plausible that they do. So I'm sure some big fans can answer that question.
Okay.
So so hop on Discord and recommend what Josh should read there to get that.
But so let's talk about his death, because I guess we're just kind of jumping I guess we're focusing more on characters than we are on plot.
Yeah, I think we can talk about some of the larger plot points if we miss anything. But I did just kind of want to talk through the characters and let's see who we liked, what we liked, and what we didn't. Yeah.
So his death was. I was happy he died. It was kind of that type feeling where when I didn't feel like his arc would be completed without him dying, And so,
did you suspect he was going to make that sacrifice before it happened? Did it catch you by surprise?
It didn't catch me by surprise, really. I didn't expect it right when it happened, because the whole ending just kind of happened so fast, Yeah. Which we can talk about a little bit more maybe, but it just kind of felt like boom, now he's dead, which was fine because that's kind of how battles are, right? And I think that there was a lot of times in this series when that was portrayed realistically. But
I think once his hand got blown off, you knew that he's probably not coming back from this.
Yeah.
This is it. This is the climax. It just wouldn't make sense for him to. I mean, he could survive and go into retirement, but that doesn't seem like his character, right? This is not a guy who's ever going to be okay with retiring or taking a break unless he dies.
And the fact that he got to die with Taniel, there protecting Taniel, was really sad. It was really satisfying to me because you always knew that they loved each other, right? But they had really unique ways of showing that love.
And this is again, so Taniel and Tamus, father and son duo, they weren't on screen a whole lot throughout the series until this one. So it sounds like you really liked them when they were together in Autumn Republic.
Yeah, because one of the other big scenes when they were together was in the first book when he ordered him to go kill, when Tamus ordered Taniel to go kill Bo.
Right.
What a dirtbag, like, right. And I understand that like Bo was going to kill, might have been compelled to go kill Tamus. So I understand that, but
yeah,
still kind of a dirtbag move, So by the time we really get good scenes where I enjoyed them together was really pretty much the third book, I think.
What did you think of Taniel surviving? That was a little bit of a point, like you could have seen possibly both of them dying, and it was a little unclear for a little bit. And most of the country thinks that Taniel did die, and he takes that opportunity to say, I'm going to kind of move past all of these events and forge my own life here. So, like, how'd that sit with you? Did that seem like the appropriate ending for Taniel's arc?
I thought it was appropriate, yeah. I thought it would have been really brave had Brian McClellan done a little Christopher Nolan type move and left that ambiguous, Oh,
if he had survived or not, just
maybe give a little bit of a hint that he survived,
The coin is still spinning, we're not sure, or the top.
Yeah. Something like that. Or, Ka-Poel does some, like you spend one more scene of Ka-Poel and somebody walks up to her and she smiles. You know what I mean? Because Ka-Poel was never a viewpoint character. So I think that would have been cool to like have the last scene of the series, the viewpoint from her and her smiling. Something like that, where you're pretty sure that he's alive, but it's not explicitly stated,
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I think
have we seen anything like that? Like a huge thing like that in other books? I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, there were some definitely unanswered things towards the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. The TV show has since spoiled that a little bit. I'm thinking of spoilers for A Song of Ice and Fire, but you know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. So I think that would have been cool, but as it was like, okay, that works. I wasn't upset with it. I was happy with it. It wasn't as satisfying as Tamus's arc. But it was good. I was happy with it.
How'd you like Taniel and Ka-Poel together? Sounds like you did like them quite a bit. I like the idea of them, but sometimes it just seems like there's not like quite enough of a relationship that's been fleshed out. So you're reading it, and as a reader, you're like, I believe that they have a good relationship because it seems like they do, but I haven't like explicitly seen like a whole lot of details here. Like I maybe want like the backstory of how they met originally or something a little more than that, but maybe like, did you not need that? Were you okay with it as it was?
I started being more okay with it when I realized that we weren't really going to get that. And when I realized that Ka-Poel is damaged, right? She has severe PTSD and she's mute because of it, or because I think it was implied that she screamed so much that she lost her ability to speak or something like that.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that one.
Or if she, but that person, like, somebody that has something that traumatic happen to them, right, still deserves to be loved. And Taniel is someone that can understand that because he's been through a lot of traumatic things.
Sure.
Things. And they were going to stick by each other no matter what. And I think for the first little part of their relationship, he felt that he would be taking advantage of her. because he felt that he was in a position of power, right? And didn't want to take advantage, use his power that from saving her to exploit that, right? Because he's a pretty genuinely good guy. But by the time you realize that Ka-Poel is really the powerful one and could snap him like a twig, he's able to let go a little bit more and
yeah, I think that was a really good way that McClellan introduced Ka-Poel, like giving you kind of small doses of like how powerful she is, and by the end of the book, you're still like maybe a little bit thinking what the heck is going on with Ka-Poel. Like she can do all this stuff, and the other magic is explained pretty well, but Ka-Poel seems to have this whole other thing, and we're not sure what this is. So I guess maybe just I would have liked more of a viewpoint from her in this series. It might have helped me understand their relationship a little bit more, because like I for sure agree with you. I think they are good for each other, and I think there's a lot of reasons why, but at the same time, you kind of have to read between the lines to really get there. This is like a similar criticism I have with a lot of the Wheel of Time romances, where I think the characters are good for each other, like most of them. Maybe not all of them. Some of the romances I don't like as much in that series, but at the same time, you don't see a whole lot of that on camera, and you kind of have to just like assume that it's happened when you're not watching, and that it is good. But I struggle with that. I don't know. Like maybe we just felt like we didn't want to actually write the romance out and let the reader imagine it instead.
It's kind of the general rule is show, don't tell, except for when it comes to romances.
I guess, maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's what I'm saying. The romances that I do like give me some quoth Denna or something, like little, back and forth banter.
No. Quoth.
I mean,
you not use quoth Denna as a good example of a romance.
Well, it's a romance I'm really invested in. I don't think it's necessarily
right. You're not,
that's the opposite. That's the opposite example, because I don't think that is a good romance for the characters. But it's a romance I'm really invested in because we've seen so much of it on camera, and the witty banter back and forth and all the pining is like written really well, to the point where I really want it to be good, but at the same time it's frustrating when it's not. Yeah. So that's a romance I'm more invested in. So
my crazy crackpot theory in the maybe 10-15% of the book where we were wondering who the other half of the god was that it was going to be Ka-Poel.
That would have been quite the twist. So in this theory, like, is she still, she's like the good half or something?
That god's name?
Yeah, Brood.
Yeah. So the other half of him was going to be Ka-Poel, and that's why she was so powerful enough to take on Kresimir. That was kind of what the theory I was developing. And then nothing. And then we never really got to explain besides a comment about, she's the most powerful sorcerer that I've ever seen from that other land that we don't really know anything about.
Dionyse? Vitrasta?
Yeah.
What? Yep. Just you wait, Josh.
The confidence with which you said those names and pronounced them makes me, certain that they're going to be more important.
I mean, look, I'm not trying to spoil the second trilogy, but it takes place in a different part of the world a few years later with some characters you've seen before.
Okay.
So, that's not, I mean, you'll get that from very early on in the trilogy. So that was, go ahead. Yeah. Well, did you have any more on your half of Brood theory?
Yeah, I was either thinking it was going to be Nyla or Ka-Poel.
And so were you satisfied with the way it did turn out, or were you thinking,
no.
I mean, Nyla or Ka-Poel, that would have been interesting. It would have been tricky. I don't know what the story would have turned into then. I think there's a story that exists where that's written in. Yeah. It would certainly be different than this ending.
Right. Well, because this ending, Claremont wasn't really a bad guy. Like he was a tool, right? Just using mortals as to play games with, right? So in that sense, he was bad, but he wasn't specifically malevolent towards anybody.
Sure.
beyond. I don't know. He wasn't like evil, right? Maybe he was, but
I mean, other than like the fact that the god brood was more evil and was, had killed the other gods, taken their power, planned to kill Kresimir, take his power, and I guess control all of the nine. And so that is evil. But you mean like the mortal shell was maybe not evil?
yeah.
And
In
so,
terms of what you saw on screen, like Claremont wasn't really a super villain. He
yeah,
was kind of an antagonistic force. You didn't really know
sure.
what to think of him too much throughout the series. I was kind of bored with all the politics, to be honest.
So that's one criticism that I would have. So the characters are fantastic. I think we still need to talk about Adamant and his family. We'll get to that. But outside of the characters, the plot was good. It was a cool setting, a cool French Revolution type of plot. And overall, like the main arc of the story was fairly solid, and you were always following along. It was always pretty exciting. However, there were all of these subplots that were just kind of subsumed by the main plot, to the point where, like, okay, there's this subplot, and I don't necessarily know if I believe that it matters all that much, because I think it will just kind of like wrap up, and it's like pushing us along, and we're getting close to fulfilling the main plot. But at the same time, like, I don't think this thing really matters all that much. And I feel like that's where McClellan has really gotten better as an author in his next series, where the pieces come together a little bit more. And so we're forming a more complex plot puzzle. And this was more just like fairly straightforward. And we were fine with just attacking this plot from one angle.
Yeah, well, and the whole mystery of who was skimming the gunpowder. You know
gosh, I mean? Yeah, it's like I didn't love that.
Yeah, it's a way to move characters from A to B and to provide some conflict and to have characters doing something.
Yeah, it's like, how much do we think that this Helsinki general dude is really going to cause any large problems, right? Like, we're just going to take care of him eventually. It's not everything that, a lot of the subplots and the conflicts there, you think, we're going to defeat this thing. It's not a huge deal.
Right.
Other than, I mean, I will say, I think the one subplot that was maybe a little more compelling to me was Adamant trying to find Joseph, taken by the slavers.
Yeah.
Like, that didn't work out. And that was like a major thing. And that was a fail. That was a negative.
I know. And that was what I was really hoping that this book would be a large scale, battle between gods, and then Adamant like figuring out how to get his son back. And it wasn't, right? Like, he didn't really do all that much with his son, or it was.
Yeah, it didn't. That had like no effect on the overall story, I think, is
he
what you're
just
saying,
saw
right?
his son with this warden guy.
Yeah.
And then was like, Bo, can you take my son out? And then
a little bit. Yeah. And I think that might have even happened off camera. So we didn't even really get the full effect. Is that right?
No, I think I think Taniel might have killed him or something. I think he was like a warden that was set up ambushing them or something.
And he sees that he's missing a finger.
He's missing a finger. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, oh my gosh. And so really good twist, right? And I liked it. And I thought it added a lot to the feel of the story, where it really kind of lent it more of a grimdark thing. Like, the son got turned into this evil incarnation, and we're not going to be able to undo this. And it totally didn't work out. We did not reunite the family. So I thought that was good for the story. I mean, obviously, like, sad, but at the same time, it really moved the story along and was satisfying in kind of a darker way.
Yeah, but we didn't get to really sit in it all that much. We didn't really get to have navel gazing from Adamant about what it feels like to lose a son. Right?
Because there wasn't enough time, because the everything else was moving along too quickly.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know, but that's the kind of stuff that I think would have moved that from being a good storyline, like you were saying, of okay, here's something that doesn't work out, to being, wow, McClellan is really a master of character work. Which I think characters are the strongest part of the book. Don't get me wrong, but for how much I wanted to like Adamant, because he felt like he was supposed to be the grounding person in the series, we didn't get a whole lot of time to really experience his emotions.
I mean, there's different ways to deal with this type of character that, like you say, is the common man, hero, boots on the ground type of guy. Like, he's not powered, but he's smart and he can do things, or he has a perspective that our magicians don't have, and therefore he's got this advantage. There's ways to do this character. So it's not like every character has to be done in the same way. But one way I really like the character is if they do something in the heat of the battle where all the magic's being flung around, that makes a small difference, that turns the tide of the thing. And Adamant certainly does a lot of things, but you would hope that like a lot of these plots, these subplots, like I'm looking for my son, he's into a warden, that's cool, but then like, okay, this is going to lead into like, figuring out the thing, or it's going to, he's going to trip up the god at the major part because he's chasing after his son. I don't know, something like that ties in more.
Or if his son was going to be critical to the god's plan succeeding and he had to kill his son in order to prevent that from happening.
Or the fact that he was turned into a warden, like, oh my gosh, this, my son was turned into a warden, therefore I realized that, a regular guy could be a god, and we put it all together, something like that. But it just didn't quite get there.
Yeah, it was sad, and it was well done. And I thought it was needed, but it didn't quite make it to the S tier, top of the line. This is how you should handle loss that a character experiences.
Yeah. Hey, what does S stand for in the tier list? It's like super. It's like superb.
Superane.
We're going to do a Dresden Files tier list ranking once Battleground comes out, probably in about a month or so. We'll think about Battleground for a little bit, and then we're putting our first ever Phantology tier list. So I'll have that answer for you by that time.
Phantology so original with our tier list coming out.
All right, we'll have F tier Phantology at the top.
I like it.
So we talked through some characters. I think we can. Were there any other plot points that you felt like are worth mentioning? I mean, I'm kind of looking through. So the beginning of the book is fairly standard. We talked about the whole black powder skimming thing that we didn't like. The middle is a lot of fighting. There is some turning of the tides here with Nyla going through and killing a whole bunch of people. That was interesting. They find Taniel. They get through the whole thing with Helsinki. The Kez negotiate peace. Doesn't go very well, but then they find out the Kez are all been taken out internally anyway.
Well, let me pause right there. I really did like that Tamus made this mistake of thinking that the Kez violated the peace, the treaty talks. I thought it showed a lot of weakness that he didn't show before that. He was kind of infallible a little bit before that in terms of his battle prowess.
Oh yeah,
everything seemed to kind of work out for him. I mean, I know that
every move was correct.
Yeah, and this was a blunder, right? He messed this up, and he got played, right? And so
he's got some blinders, and the Kez are certainly a blind spot because of his background,
because of his wife and
Nick's lost and all that.
Yeah. So I really liked that. Was one of the subplots. Well, I guess that was at that point the main plot of the book, but I think it was handled really well. With you think it's the Kez betraying it, but it wasn't, and there were clues. And Adamant. That was one time where Adamant figured that out, right? And played a pretty critical role in the narrative.
Adamant also figures out that Sheris was, the one that tried to kill him, and then she got locked away. and then he also puts together, that Claremont is brood. So I guess maybe that, I guess what I was saying earlier was that I like that Adamant figured this out, but I wish that the subplot with his family had tied in more to this. Right. So maybe I take back some of what I was saying about how I wanted the boots on the ground guy to be the one figuring things out a little bit more. That happened. So good. I am now saying, I'm retroactively saying that I liked that. But what I wanted to clarify, what I wanted to have happen was for the other part of his plot to tie into that.
Yeah. Was to have that subplot matter more as opposed to Adamant as a character mattering more.
Right. So then, I mean, the war is pretty much wrapped up. We discover that Adam is still alive. He took over Charlemagne's body. Tamus comes back. There's this big parade. Everything looks good. And then Claremont reveals that he's brood. And then he's going to pretty much take over after Tumblr wins the election. And Sheris comes in. And then, this is really like the whole big climactic avalanche. And this is, I mean, the climax was good, right? Like the action was pretty big. We go back to the palace, which is nice because that's kind of where it all started.
That was really cool. Yeah.
But now the script has been flipped here, and Tamus is really kind of fighting on the other side.
Yeah,
in some sense.
He's fighting to maintain the status quo that he is now established.
Yeah, there we go.
Right. Yeah, and it seems pretty hopeless there for a second. How are you going to defeat this god that we are not, nearly as powerful as? And you get Tamus's hand was it crushed or chopped or what happened?
I think it's just blown off.
Yeah.
Don't remember exactly what happens there, but yeah, once he lost the hand, I kind of knew, okay, he's not getting the hand back, and he's pretty committed here, so I think he's dead.
Yeah. There's
a good moment, right as Tamus is dying, the last thing he says to Taniel is, your mother says hello. That's great, right?
I think I almost teared up at that part.
Yeah, if a book about the French Revolution and flintlock fantasy is going to make you tear up and cry, it would be this moment.
Yeah. I don't really... It's still hard for me to believe that Ka-Poel and Taniel were actually able to take out this god-like figure, though, right?
That's the thing for me with the ending here. I thought the ending was cool. The action was really big. But at the same time, I was like, okay, there's gods. We've known about this. I mean, we saw Kresimir, obviously, since the end of the first book. But now here they are, sprung on us right in the middle of Adro, and it's also this new god, and this new god has two halves to it, and all of a sudden we learn that it's been able to consume the powers of the other gods, and therefore it's the new big bad, and all but at the very end of the third book, it is the big bad, and we have to kill this thing. It's a twist, but at the same time, I don't think it was set up enough.
And the way that they kill it was with the spear tip, right? That had
it's like the red tipped, the same thing that the same type of bullet that was able to shoot Kresimir.
Yeah, but it was just kind of, oh, that's here now. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
it all just seemed to come together a little bit too nicely without being foreshadowed enough, or being you didn't really know why they were now able to take out this god. It just happened by chance, by luck. I don't know.
And to be fair, I'm always a person who wants to know more. And when we start to get into the lore of this fantasy series, I want to know about the gods. I want to know, okay, what's the god pantheon look like, and how are they related to everyone? And we get a little bit of this, but I want to know what exactly are their powers? What can they do? What can't they do? And maybe that's because I'm just a huge Sanderson nerd, and that's what I'd like to get in my deities, we'll say. But this just wasn't quite satisfying enough to me, because this is like the thing, and it wasn't quite well defined enough.
So what we do know, right, is that Kresimir started gathering all these super powerful privileged, and this god brood they're born like as conjoined twins, and he separated them, right, and
so
from
okay,
his parents,
so
from
maybe
their parents.
I mean,
but this was all
is,
info dumped during the climax, pretty much.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe again, I should backtrack a little bit. It is explained to some extent, but I guess what I'm going to settle on is, if this is going to be the main thing, then I need it to be a thing more throughout the earlier stages of the series as well. I wasn't satisfied with it just coming towards the end and then having to accept that this is now the main, like, these are where all the stakes are at.
Yeah. And with how they take Charis out, of just like, now we have this kryptonite type thing that happens to be in the room, and we can kill her with it.
Yeah. So,
but my whole thing with this whole series is that the plot is good enough and the characters are really, really good, right? Mm-hmm. The characters are bordering on exceptional, and the plot doesn't do too much to distract from that. When we get down and nitpick it seems to come apart easier than I'd like. But the characters are the best thing about this series.
And it's very likely that we missed some details. I mean, we're just fans of the series. We've only read them once, so it's not something we know all the details on. So please, hop on Discord, let us know what we missed. We totally welcome that. So our opinions are really just from surface level fandom reading. So there's very likely some errors in our nitpicking. But I agree with you, and I think the plot does enough to put the characters into positions where they can shine, and that alone is well worth reading the series.
Yeah. You can do a lot worse than this series. It's not going to be the first, 5 fantasy book series that you should pick up if you're new to fantasy. But for a flintlock, fun action-packed series, somebody that's read a lot of other fantasy and is looking for another fun read, this is an easy recommend.
So, Josh, are you excited for more? Sounds like the rest of your 2020 is already pretty much booked with your reading schedule, but you are planning on reading Gods of Blood and Powder maybe like 2021?
Yeah, sure. Let's put that in the docket. Early 2021, yeah. I'd say.
All right, Josh is down for
my work schedule. They're pretty much all of January. I have like a lot of very tedious work that I can burn through audiobooks while I work.
Fantastic. Look for lots of Phantology episodes in January.
I get to have the privilege of sending out about 20,000 ACA forms for this is a little sneak peek into my personal life. And so while I'm printing and packaging and shipping those, I can be rocking the audiobooks.
Yeah, and if you want to know what ACA forms are, we're not telling you on this podcast, so look for that extra detail somewhere else.
But I'm excited to read it, and I'm a fan of the series. I'm glad I read it. So thanks for the recommend, Steven.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're saying, I think this first trilogy is probably something that I would recommend to someone who has read several other fantasy series and likes them. Likes more of this, I don't know, like, it's not super grimdark, but it's like a little bit darker fantasy. It doesn't always work out super well, but once you've read a few and you're like, wow, I like fantasy, I'd like to read maybe like a different type of fantasy. Yeah, read some rifle powder snorting fantasy. It's different. It's cool.
Yeah, you get some cocaine and drugs guns and some world shaping events, and you got yourself a fun ride.
Yeah. So that's a wrap for the book. We always end Phantology episodes with our worst of the best. segment where we talk about something we really liked about the book, but like one minor thing that kind of made the best part like almost still one minor thing that was great, but at the same time, it's like, I wish it could have been like a little bit greater. So did you have one? I mean, I know we kind of talked about some things we liked and we didn't like already.
A lot of what we've talked about was the worst of the best, but I will pick one that we didn't talk about, which was the final confrontation with Jolene. If you're going to have an epilogue, I don't really like that he spent his epilogue on tying up this end that didn't really need to be tied up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it should have been. I think it should have been tied up because it was a loose end. But like the epilogue is the epilogue. Yeah. The epilogue to the entire trilogy. Yeah.
Yeah. You have the villain from book 1 that's already been pretty much taken care of and taken out of the equation for a lot of practical purposes is what you're going to spend your epilogue on. I didn't love it. I did like it because you got to see Ka-Poel and Taniel were going to be doing their thing and we're going to be happy. But yeah.
I'll say my worst, the best one. Okay, we kind of already talked about this. I thought some of the subplots were maybe not as strong. I was maybe looking for more of a class type of struggle in one of the subplots because this was very much the French Revolution, and obviously you have the common people, the bourgeoisie, rising up and taking the power and just deposing of the kings. So anyway,
it was more of a military coup though than like a bourgeois revolution.
Yeah, but like, did it have to be only a military coup?
Yeah,
is maybe what I'm thinking. Like, yeah, certainly the military was involved, but practically, if this were to happen, wouldn't the and I guess like Rickard represents that a little bit, but maybe like Adamant could have been, I don't know, leading some like group of ska or middle class guys in some mission. I don't know, like a little bit more of a view into Adro a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I would have liked that too. Good call.
Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode of Phantology. This is a wrap for a series. Always exciting when we can conclude a series and get that under our belt. We'd like to, I'll sleep easier at night when we have a bunch of these series all done and we don't have all these loose ends because I'm too much of a red type of personality. But thanks for listening. If you like Phantology, check us out again on www.phantologybooks.com, and please get on Discord and tell us your suggestions, what you'd like us to read in the future. If you'd like to support us and help us continue to grow and upgrade our episodes and our setups, etc., then consider supporting on Patreon. Consider looking into the Audible partnership. And if you'd like to spend some money but don't want to support Phantology, then why don't you check out booksforprisoners.net, where they do some fantastic things for people who are in need. So thanks, Josh. Any final words from you? Any final Powder Mage quips or anything?
Not Power Mage related, but if you're planning on signing up for Audible, use our code. We get a kickback and you'll be supporting us. And Audible is some good stuff. So
yeah, I already said that, man.
Oh, did you? And the outro too?
Yeah. It got a double feature.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. Right. That's why we edit. That's why we edit episodes.
Anyway, thanks, Stephen, for it was really you that got me to read the series. So thanks for getting me to read it. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.